Hi there. You made it through the day, and maybe it wasn't an easy one. But you're here now, and that means something. Welcome to Sleepless Librarian, a quiet place where stories are told not to excite, but to comfort, to take the noise out of your head and replace it with something timeless and calm. Tonight, I'll read to you the story of Heracles, a hero born of thunder and tragedy, and the 12 labors he had to face to find peace again. Not for glory, not for gold, but to be free. There will be monsters, and golden apples, and even a lion that no blade could cut. But don't worry, I'll be right here, guiding you gently through every word. You don't need to stay awake. You don't even need to listen closely. Just breathe, and let the story carry you. This is the 12 labors of Heracles, and your time to rest begins now. The 12 labors of Heracles. Chapter 1, The Curse and the Cloak. The madness of the mighty. Once there was a man so strong that the earth itself seemed to hold its breath when he walked. His name was Heracles, son of Zeus and a mortal woman named Alcmene. But though he was born of a god, Heracles did not live an easy life. He was haunted. The goddess Hera, wife of Zeus, loathed Heracles. She saw in him a reminder of her husband's unfaithfulness and swore to make him suffer. One terrible night, when the moon hid its face behind clouds, Hera sent a madness upon him. When Heracles awoke, blood stained his hands. His beloved wife and children were gone, slain by his own strength. Grief hollowed him. He walked to the temple of Apollo, cloaked in shame, dragging his lion skin behind him. There, the oracle of Delphi waited in mist and silence. "You seek redemption," she whispered. Then serve your cousin, King Eurystheus of Tiryns. Complete 12 labors, each more impossible than the last, and perhaps the gods will forgive you." Heracles bowed. His fists trembled, but his voice was steady. "I will do them all." Labor 1, the Nemean lion. The first task took Heracles to the wild hills of Nemea, where a monstrous lion roamed. It was no ordinary beast. Its golden fur could not be pierced by arrows or blade. It devoured warriors, shattered shields, and roared with a voice like thunder on stone. Heracles climbed the crags of Nemea until he found the lion's lair. He shot an arrow. Ting! It bounced off like rain on bronze. "So," he muttered, cracking his knuckles, "you need a wrestling match." They battled under the blood-orange sky. The lion lunged. Heracles caught it mid-leap. Dust flew, rocks cracked. Heracles pressed his mighty arms around its neck, straining until the beast finally went limp. But how to skin it? His dagger failed, his axe chipped. Then came a whisper from the breeze, Athena's voice, wise and calm, "Use its own claws." With the lion's talon, Heracles peeled back its golden skin and wore it over his shoulders like a second hide. From that day, the lion cloak became his armor, and the labor became legend. Labor? 2, the Lernaean hydra. Swamps boiled under the hot breath of the Lernaean hydra, a serpentine monster with 9 venomous heads, and worse, when one head was cut off, 2 more grew back. Its lair reeked of death, and no man dared approach. But Heracles was no ordinary man. He stepped into the marsh, bow ready and sword sharp. The hydra hissed, rising from the muck like a nightmare. Heracles swung and lopped off a head. 2 hissed back into its place. From the hillside, his young nephew Iolaus shouted, "We need fire!" Torch in hand, Iolaus handed it down, and Heracles grinned. Each time he severed a head, Iolaus cauterized the wound with flame. Head by head, the Hydra fell, until only one remained, immortal and hateful. Heracles wrestled it to the ground and buried it beneath a massive boulder. He dipped his arrows in the black venom. One scratch would now mean certain death. From afar, Hera watched and sent a giant crab to aid the beast. Heracles crushed it underfoot. In spite, Hera placed the crab in the stars as the constellation Cancer. Another labor complete. Another myth born. Labor 3, the Ceryneian hind. Heracles' next task was not to slay, but to capture, a far greater challenge. The Ceryneian hind was no mere deer. It had golden antlers and hooves of bronze, and it was sacred to Artemis, goddess of the hunt. To harm it was to invite divine wrath. Heracles searched for a full year, chasing the elusive creature through forests, valleys, and mountains. He tracked it by starlight, by hoofprint, and by the glimmer of gold in the trees. At last, he found it drinking at a still river. He crept close, breath held. With a whisper to the wind, he let loose a net and caught it without harm. Suddenly the air shimmered. Artemis appeared, radiant in silver, bow in hand. "You dare steal my creature?" she asked, eyes flashing. Heracles knelt. "I do not steal. I obey the oracle. I promise the hind shall return unharmed." She studied him, then nodded. "Then go." He carried the hind to Eurystheus, who gawked greedily. But Heracles was swift to release the deer before the king could take it, and it vanished into the wilds once more. The goddess had been appeased, and Heracles had passed yet another trial. Chapter 2: Blood, Birds, and Rivers. Labor 4, the Erymanthian boar. Snow fell thick in the highlands of Mount Erymanthus, where Heracles now sought his next prey, a gigantic boar, whose tusks had gutted warriors and scattered villages in panic. The beast left deep ruts through the frost-covered forest, and Heracles followed them patiently, step by crunching step. Wind howled like wolves, but he marched on, unshivering in his lion-skin cloak. When he finally found the boar, it was charging through a pine grove, snorting steam and rage. With a mighty roar of his own, Heracles leapt into its path. He dodged once, twice, then grabbed it by the tusks and wrestled it into a snowbank, driving it deep until only the beast's furious snorts could be heard under the ice. He lashed its hooves with chains and slung the massive beast over his shoulders, trudging back through snow and storm. When Heracles entered the gates of Tiryns, the boar still shrieking and kicking, King Eurystheus shrieked louder. He dove into a bronze storage jar to hide, his royal dignity forgotten. Heracles stood there, boar on his back, and smirked. It was becoming a pattern. Labor 5, the Augean stables. For the 5th labor, Eurystheus decided to humiliate Heracles. "You think yourself mighty," the king said, trying to sound brave from behind his jar. "Then clean the Augean stables in a single day." The stables of King Augeas housed thousands of cattle and hadn't been cleaned in 30 years. The manure piled high as walls, and the stench travelled for miles. But Heracles didn't flinch. He didn't grab a broom. He didn't grab a shovel. He looked at the walls. He looked at the sky. He walked to the banks of two nearby rivers, the Alpheus and the Peneus. With a thunderous roar, Heracles smashed through the stable walls, carved trenches and diverted both rivers into the pens. Torrents of water swept through the filth, carrying away decades of waste in mere hours. The cattle mooed, confused and slightly cleaner. But when Augeas learned Heracles had done it so cleverly and so quickly, he refused to pay him as promised. Heracles was furious, and later, in a separate tale, would return and defeat Augeas in battle. Still, the gods counted the labor complete, for he had cleansed what no man dared touch. Labor 6 the Stymphalian birds. Next, Heracles travelled to the marshes of Lake Stymphalus, a desolate place where the trees stood bare and the sky dark with feathers. These were no ordinary birds. They had razor-sharp metallic feathers they could launch like arrows. Their beaks could pierce armor, and they fed on flesh. The ground beneath the trees was littered with bones. Heracles knew arrows wouldn't be enough. He stood quietly at the edge of the lake until he heard the rustle of wings and the eerie, metallic screech overhead. Then came a gift, the goddess Athena appearing once more with a sly smile. She handed him a pair of Crotala bronze clappers forged by Hephaestus. "When struck," she said, "they'll wake the dead." Heracles climbed a ridge above the marsh and slammed the clappers together. The sound rattled the skies. The birds panicked and burst from the trees in a screeching cloud of steel. He let loose arrow after arrow, each tipped with hydra venom, and the sky rained feathers and blood. The survivors scattered, never to return. The lake was silent once more, and the villagers returned to its shores in peace. Chapter 3: Bulls, Mares, and a Queen's Wrath. Labor 7 the Cretan bull. Far across the sea on the island of Crete, a bull snorted smoke and trampled vineyards. It had been gifted by Poseidon, the sea god, but cursed when King Minos refused to sacrifice it. Now the creature raged with divine fury, its hooves shattering stone, its breath steaming like boiling water. Heracles arrived by ship. The people of Crete pointed him to the hills where the bull roamed. He found it at sunrise, grazing alone on a rocky slope. The bull saw him and charged faster than thunder. Heracles stood his ground. At the last second he dove aside and grabbed its horns. The struggle began. Man against beast? Mortal against divine fury. Dust rose, rocks cracked, trees splintered. At last, Heracles twisted its neck and forced the bull to its knees, tying it with thick rope and dragging it to his ship. He sailed back to Tiryns, presenting it to Eurystheus like a gift basket. The cowardly king shrieked. Again, "Set it free!" he cried, diving into his bronze jar once more. The bull was loosed upon the land and would later father a monster, the Minotaur, who waited in a labyrinth for another hero. Labor 8 the Mares of Diomedes. The next labor took Heracles to Thrace, where a savage king named Diomedes ruled. His prized horses, 4 monstrous mares, were no ordinary beasts. They were fed not with oats, but with human flesh. Travellers disappeared. Servants were dragged screaming to the stables. The mare's breath stank of blood. Heracles arrived, silent as a storm. He fought Diomedes and his men in the dark of night. With one mighty blow, he knocked the cruel king to the ground, then dragged him to his own stables and threw him to the mares. The beasts reared, hissed, and devoured their master whole. Strangely, they calmed after that. With blood still dripping from their jaws, they followed Heracles like docile dogs. He led them back to Eurystheus, who, after recovering from yet another fright, dedicated the horses to Hera. No one saw the mares again. Some say they wandered north and were never caught. Others say they still run wild, waiting for another cruel king. Labour nined the belt of Hippolyta. Heracles next set sail to Themyscira, land of the fierce Amazons, warrior women unmatched in strength and pride. He was to retrieve the belt of Queen Hippolyta, a magical girdle gifted by Ares, god of war. When Heracles arrived, he did not draw his sword. Instead, he spoke. "I come for the belt, not for war." Queen Hippolyta was curious. Tall and regal, she looked him in the eye and said, "A gift for a trial of the gods?" Perhaps. She agreed to give it freely. But Hera would not allow peace. Disguised as an Amazon, she spread rumors that Heracles meant to kidnap the queen. Panic swept the camp. The Amazons armed themselves. Spears clashed, hooves pounded, and battle began. Heracles, thinking he'd been betrayed, fought back. In the chaos, Hippolyta fell by his hand. When the battle ended, he stood over her fallen body belt in hand, sorrow in his eyes. He returned with the girdle, but it was a victory soaked in regret. Even heroes sometimes win at a terrible cost. Chapter 4: Giants, Gods, and the Gate of Death. Labour 10. The cattle of Geryon. Far to the west, beyond deserts and oceans, lived Geryon, a fearsome giant with 3 bodies, 3 heads, and a herd of magnificent red cattle. Heracles was tasked to steal the herd and return it to Greece. The journey was perilous. Heracles crossed scorching lands where the sun blazed without mercy. At one point he grew so furious at the sun's heat, he fired an arrow into the sky. Rather than strike him down, Helios, god of the sun, laughed at Heracles' courage and lent him a golden cup-shaped boat to cross the great sea. When Heracles reached Geryon's island, he found the giant's 2-headed guard dog, Orthrus, snarling at the gate. With one strike of his club, he silenced the beast. He then slew the herdsman and finally confronted Geryon himself. 3 bodies, 3 weapons. But Heracles had the strength of the gods and the arrows of the Hydra. One by one the giant fell. He gathered the cattle and began the long march home. Hera, ever vengeful, sent flies to sting the herd and scatter them. Heracles spent days rounding them up, fighting off bandits and storms. But at last he arrived, herding the cattle into Tiryns like a weary shepherd. Eurystheus claimed them and sacrificed them to Hera. Heracles said nothing, but his eyes burned. Labour 11. The apples of the Hesperides. The penultimate labour was the most mysterious. Heracles must fetch golden apples from a secret garden at the edge of the world. These sacred fruits, hidden among the stars, were guarded by nymphs called the Hesperides, and a terrible dragon named Ladon coiled endlessly around the tree's trunk. Worse, Heracles didn't know where to find them. He wandered through foreign lands, asking kings and oracles. Along the way, he encountered the imprisoned Titan Prometheus, chained to a rock and tormented by eagles. Heracles, moved by pity, shot the bird and broke the chains. Prometheus, grateful, told him the way, and so Heracles climbed to the end of the earth where the Titan Atlas stood, holding up the sky. "I'll get you the apples," Atlas offered. "If you hold this burden for a moment." Heracles nodded. and took the heavens upon his shoulders. Atlas returned with the apples, but he had tasted freedom. "I'll deliver them for you," he said. "I'll never take the sky back." But Heracles was clever. He nodded and said, "Very well. Just hold it for a moment while I pad my shoulders." Atlas grunted, took the sky back, and Heracles grabbed the apples and left. Eurystheus couldn't believe his eyes. Apples of gold glowing like starlight. Even he knew better than to keep them. The fruit was returned to the gods, and Heracles had only one trial left. Labor 12 Cerberus. The final labor was no mere feat of strength, it was a descent into the land of the dead. "Bring me Cerberus," said Eurystheus. The three-headed hound of Hades. To the underworld Heracles went, passing through deep caverns and the river Styx, where the dead whispered his name. The shades parted. Even the spirits feared him. At last he stood before Hades, god of the dead, seated upon a throne of bone. "You may take Cerberus," said the god, his voice like crumbling earth, "but only if you subdue him without weapons." Heracles nodded. He found Cerberus huge, black, with 3 snarling heads and a tail like a serpent, and wrapped his arms around the beast, holding firm even as it bit and twisted and thrashed. Sweat and blood poured. But Heracles did not let go. Finally, Cerberus whimpered and went still. Dragging the monstrous dog by its chain, Heracles returned to the world above. When Eurystheus saw the creature, eyes glowing and mouths drooling, he leapt into his bronze jar for the final time. "Take it back!" he screamed, and Heracles did. He returned Cerberus to the underworld as promised. The 12 labors were complete. At last Heracles was free. His name echoed through the mountains, his feats carved into temple walls. But fate had one more trial. Deceived by a poisoned gift, a robe soaked in hydra venom, Heracles' mortal body burned with pain. His skin blistered, his strength faded. He built his own funeral pyre, and atop it he lay, ready to die. The flames rose, but death never claimed him. In a flash of lightning, Zeus himself lifted Heracles to Olympus, granting him immortality. Even Hera relented, for she could no longer deny his greatness. She gave him her daughter, Hebe, goddess of youth, as wife. From then on, Heracles lived among the stars, a god in full glory. But mortals still remember. When lightning cracks across the hills, when lions roar in empty valleys, when stories are told beneath firelit skies, we remember the man who defied monsters, gods, and death itself. We remember Heracles, the end. Heracles, the heart behind the strength. Before the storm, in a quiet corner of Greece, where the olive trees swayed, like dancers in the mountains, slept beneath veils of cloud, a boy was born who would one day lift the sky. His name was Heracles. The people would come to know him as the strongest man to ever live, a demigod, a warrior, a monster slayer. But before the tales of labors and lions, there was simply a child who laughed in the sun, cried in the dark, and held his mother's hand like any other. This is not the story of the 12 labors. This is the story of the heart behind the hero. So lie back, let your worries slip away like water down a stream, and listen gently now to the forgotten stories of Heracles. Chapter 1. The Boy Who Held Snakes. They say Heracles was born of Zeus, king of the gods, and a mortal queen named Alcmene, but no throne was laid out for him. No divine trumpet blew. Only Hera, Zeus's wife, noticed, and she noticed with fury. Even as a baby, Heracles was not safe. One night, As soft winds hummed through the olive branches, Hera sent 2 serpents to slither into the infant's crib. But baby Heracles laughed. He reached out with tiny fists and grasped both snakes by the neck, gurgling with delight. By morning the snakes were still. Alcmene rushed in, her heart thundering, only to find her baby giggling, holding the limp serpents like toys. And so the world whispered, "This child is touched by the gods." But behind the whispers, Heracles was still a boy, still someone who would fall off his stool, scrape his knees, and hug his mother when thunder frightened him. He was strong but still soft. Chapter 2, The Music Master. As Heracles grew, so did his strength. But strength unchecked is not always a gift. At school, Heracles struggled with quiet things like playing the lyre. His teacher, a strict old man named Linus, would often sigh and scold. "Pluck gently," he'd say again and again. But one day, as Linus struck Heracles' hands in frustration, the boy reacted not with words, but with instinct. He struck back, and Linus fell, lifeless. Heracles hadn't meant to kill him. He had only meant to stop the pain. But it was too late. The village murmured. The gods watched, and Heracles was sent away to the mountains, where strength could be used with purpose. It was the first time he learned strength could hurt, and he would carry that lesson with him forever. Chapter 3, The Centaur's Wine. In the highlands of Arcadia, where mist clings to pine trees and rivers whisper through the rocks, Heracles met an old friend. Pholus, a wise and kind centaur, welcomed him with warmth. "Come," he said, "rest here. The world can wait." They dined on berries, roasted goat, and old cheese. Heracles asked for wine, but Pholus hesitated. "This is sacred," he said, eyeing the sealed amphora. The other centaurs would not approve. Heracles only laughed. "Then let them drink too." The wine was opened, and soon it flowed like joy itself. But the other centaurs smelled it strong and sacred, and they came in fury. Hooves pounding, arrows flying. Heracles defended his friend with bow and club. But amidst the chaos, Pholus accidentally dropped a poisoned arrow on his own book. The venom from the Hydra from an earlier labor was too strong. Pholus died quietly, and Heracles wept. He buried him under the roots of a cypress tree and promised, "I will remember the kindness you showed me." And he did. Chapter 4, Hylas. In his youth, Heracles joined Jason and the Argonauts, sailing in search of the golden fleece. Among the crew was a beautiful, bright-eyed youth named Hylas, Heracles' squire, companion, and perhaps something more. They laughed together, trained together, and shared secrets only the stars heard. One night, while the Argo was docked near a forested shore, Hylas went to fetch water from a spring. He never returned. The nymphs of the spring had seen him so fair, so gentle, and fallen in love at once. They lured him into the waters, wrapping him in song, and never let him go. Heracles searched through the night. "Hylas!" he cried over and over. The crew urged him to return, but he could not yet. The world only knew Heracles as mighty, but here he was just a man calling for someone he loved, calling into silence. And though he would sail on, a part of his heart stayed by that spring, whispering the name Hylas. Chapter 5. The Titan's chains. During one of his travels, Heracles climbed the Caucasus Mountains alone and determined. There, chained to a rock, he found Prometheus, the Titan who had given fire to mankind. His punishment, an eagle feasting on his liver every day for eternity. Heracles asked no questions. He drew his bow, aimed at the sky, and shot the eagle dead with a single arrow. Prometheus gasped. "You're free," Heracles said, and broke the Titan's chains. Prometheus smiled through tears. "Why?" Heracles shrugged. "Because you helped people. That should matter." And so it did. Chapter 6. A Lover's Gift. Iole. Later in life, Heracles fell in love with a woman named Iole, bright as a flame and bold as dawn. But winning her hand came with trials, tests of archery and strength. He won, of course, but his past was never far behind. His first wife, Deianira, fearing she'd lose him, gave Heracles a gift, a robe dipped in what she thought was a love charm. It was poison. Hydra's venom unknowingly passed down. When Heracles wore the robe, pain ripped through his body. He screamed. The robe burned into his skin. No water could soothe it. In agony, Heracles climbed Mount Aita and built his own funeral pyre. But the gods were not finished with him. Chapter 7. Immortality and Peace. Zeus looked down and said, "No, he has suffered enough." Lightning struck the pyre, and Heracles' mortal body vanished in flame. But his spirit rose. The Olympians welcomed him. Even Hera at last forgave him. She gave him her daughter, Hebe, as his wife, and he became a god not of war, but of heroism and healing. From then on, Heracles walked among stars. He watched over those who needed courage, and sometimes on lonely nights, people said they could hear his laughter in the wind or feel his warmth in their dreams. The lion in the sky, the Nemean lion whose pelt he wore, became a constellation. So did the crab, the eagle, the horses, and the hydra, all reminders of the road he walked. But Heracles, true Heracles, was more than a constellation. He was a boy who tried, a man who lost and kept going, a hero who didn't fight for glory, but for love, friendship, and forgiveness. As you lie in the dark tonight, maybe your battles aren't with hydras or monsters, but with bills, worries, loneliness, or fear. Let Heracles remind you, you are not alone. You are stronger than you feel. And every night, no matter how heavy, it will pass. Sleep well, dear listener. The stars are watching, and the lion still guards the sky.